outside of initially covering the potential nominees, I haven't really touched on Amy Coney Barrett and her nomination hearing process and now the vote and the confirmation itself, because I was just waiting for all the facts to come in. I was waiting for all the autistic screeching to simmer down, and boy, has my patience really been rewarded. And I think it's going to reward you guys as well, because we're going to be taking a look at the different Democratic senators, alleged grown-ups, who have been flipping their collective lids in the past 24, 48 hours over what the fuck's been transpiring. Okay, the long and short of it is the president nominated Amy to the Supreme Court. She had her hearings. She was voted on by a margin of 52 to 48, and she was confirmed and sworn in today. There we go. Video over. Thanks a lot. Bye. But of course, it's not as easy as that. Oh, it's so close to an election. You can't do this. There's precedent for it. 29 times it's happened when there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court, and both houses were in control by the same political party, and 28 of those times has the nominee ended up being confirmed. One time was in the 1800s, and it ended up being null and void due to an ethics violations by the nominee himself. So this is an unprecedented, and it hasn't been fast-tracked. No, she was previously vetted to get onto the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. I believe she was on prior to being confirmed as a Supreme Court justice, and that was not that long ago. So they were trying everything during their hearings to find any dirt on this woman. Yeah, okay, she has 7 kids. 2 of them were adopted from Haiti. She actually did something good for the people of Haiti, unlike the Clinton Foundation. And her kids are still young enough to be in school, not like those other dusty old bags that are currently out there, Sotomayor and Kagan. And it's just so fitting that somebody who is a staunch originalist is replacing that old activist in Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I just love it. And to top everything off, the fact that that ceremony that's right here on the video player happened on the 74th birthday of one Miss Hillary Rodham Clinton. Oh, if that old bitch just wasn't so smug last time around, she could have been the one who had 3 Supreme Court justice nominees. Oh well, I'm sure somebody was summarily Clintonized for that one. Anyways, I just see this in the bottom corner. I didn't bother bringing up a page for it or anything, but CNN, MSNBC did not air coverage of Amy Coney Barrett confirmation. This is a very special situation. What the fuck? You couldn't cut away from, what would it have been, Chris Cuomo and the last couple of minutes of Rachel Maddow's favorite pics of a plaid shirt and pickup truck combinations? Like, for fuck's sakes, just partisan hackery. They would have had an entire day dedicated to it if it was a Democratic activist Supreme Court Justice nominee. But no, because she pledges to uphold the Constitution and read it as it was written, interpret it as it was written. I'm speaking of Barrett here. They won't bother playing by the rules. But before we dig into all the salt here, I just want to double back on the one concern that I have regarding her. Everything else seems fairly on the level, even though originally in my first video when we went over the potential nominees, Barbara LaGoya from Florida made a lot more sense to me. I liked a lot of the shit that she was pushing through. And one thing that's really come front and center is ACB is someone who recently voted for more lockdowns and harsher lockdowns, which I'm not exactly a big fan of. So here's what she voted for. So Chief Justice Paul Ryan, John Roberts, John McCain, this guy's a lump of shit, John Roberts, and countless U.S. District Court judges across the country have relied on the 1905 mandatory vaccination decision, Jacobson v. Massachusetts, to allow virtually unlimited power to be exercised by the state and local governments during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Supreme Court has refused to even review many examples of gross government overreach in the name of emergency powers. Jacobson's dark history includes justifying forced sterilization of mentally challenged adults. No comment. Something that is now viewed as barbaric and unconstitutional. Well, let's not go that far. It's a joke, fuckers. One vote prevented the Supreme Court from granting South Bay Pentecostal Church a temporary injunction that would have given them relief from the California Democratic governor. This is when I wish I had a soundboard and I'd just play a diarrhea clip. Expensive shelter-in-place order. Ginsburg voting with Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan rejected the church's petition. Yeah, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan were appointed by the two women were nominated by Barack Obama, and Breyer, I believe, was by Clinton. Rejected the church's petition. Oh, and Roberts, by the way, just for completion's sake, was nominated by George W. Bush, so his idiotic ghost is still lingering in the halls of Congress and the justices' chambers. Justice Clarence Thomas, who is appointed by George W.'s father, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, the last two by Trump, and Alito by W as well, voted to grant South Bay Pentecostal Church an injunction. And with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who would have voted with the left portion of the justices anyways, but because it would be a 4-4 tie, the Chief Justice has say over and ultimately the deciding vote, which is Republican nominee John Roberts right now. But we don't have to worry about that anymore now, do we? Because now we have a 9th Supreme Court justice. Earlier this month, Barrett's 3-judge appeals court panel ruled against the Illinois Republican Party's challenge to Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker's executive orders responding to the coronavirus pandemic. However, the decision is unique. The Republican Party challenged the accommodations afforded to the House of Worship, assuming that if its challenges were successful, the party would also benefit from larger gatherings. So that's the one area I would be concerned about her. I'm hoping that this was just a mental lapse, but it's something y'all should be aware of. But anyways, let's get to the good stuff, shall we? Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett was sworn in on the nation's highest court in a White House ceremony less than 2 hours after being confirmed by the Senate. Barrett, who was confirmed on a 52-48, like I said, was sworn in by Justice Clarence Thomas at about 9 p.m. on the south lawn of the White House. And as you can see there, yeah, isn't that something that the left should really approve of? A black man swearing in a woman into the highest court of the land. Don't they care about this type of identity politics? Doesn't this show the fact that there is, in fact, opportunity out there for the oppressed classes? But nah, it's never enough. They're on the wrong side of the aisle anyway, so they probably aren't black or they aren't women anyways, right? So, in brief remarks after her swearing in, Barrett said that she would act impartially while serving on the court. It is the job of the judge to resist her policy preference, she added. It would be a dereliction of duty to give in to them. This separation of duty is what makes the judiciary distinct among the 3 branches of government, she added. Which is great, which is something that I've said since, day one, that the Supreme Court is supposed to, in fact, be an impolitical and apolitical wing of government, and every single time that a president nominates a potential Supreme Court justice, it should be under that auspice that the person that you are appointing to the only unelected body of government and something with a lifelong term should really just be there to interpret the Constitution and not act as an activist. But that, of course, is just my opinion, but Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer fucking lost his goddamn mind. And here's what the cousin of the glowing Amy Schumer had to say. He said that the Senate Republicans were guilty of the partisan theft of 2 seats and a hypocritical double standard. What a sack of shit. And no, that was just after the vote, but while the vote was going on, Mazie Hirono, never one to shy away from the spotlight, had to make a spectacle of herself when it came to the exact vote. When she was asked after they went through all the yeas, all the nays had to go through, and Senator Mazie Hirono votes hell no against Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court nomination. This bitch is just making stuff up. Hirono said Barrett's appointment poses a threat to LGBTQ rights, voting rights, women's equality, health care, and everything else that she could think of accusing a woman about. Hell no, Hirono said. From the Senate floor, walking up to the table where the votes were being counted, she gave hers with a dramatic thumbs down, because everything has to be about you, doesn't it, Mazie? Yeah, if you guys were paying attention during the confirmation hearings, the Hawaiian lawmaker pressed Barrett during the latter's confirmation hearings, chiding Barrett when she referred to one of her answers to sexual orientation as a preference, which is considered an offensive and outdated term by Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Later that same day, because prior to that day, there was no reference to it being a outdated or offensive term. Seems like the left is just making it up as they go. This was also the same goofy broad who asked her if she's ever been accused of inappropriate sexual acts. Just because I asked this to every nominee. I don't know, use your common sense here, bitch. It's like asking a man, so when did you stop beating your wife? What it implies is that at one time you did in fact beat your wife, even though, it never had an accusation of it before. But when you ask that question, it's put out in the court of public opinion that at one point in time you were indeed this piece of shit who would beat their wife, even though you may not now. How do you answer that question? It's the exact same way with what happens whenever they ask President Trump to denounce white supremacy. Oh, was he actually ever a white supremacist? That's what's put out there. And with all the other smear pieces that's there, it's very, very easy to draw the conclusion that, oh, maybe at one time he was, or he probably still is. It doesn't matter. Orange man bad. Meanwhile, if you actually dug back into Trump's record, you'd realize that he's been name dropped in dozens of rap tracks. He's campaigned and fundraised with the likes of Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. He's won multiple awards from the NAACP. But none of that matters because he's red now and orange is bad. Remember that, guys. At the end of the day, orange man always bad. But moving along from Mrs. That Hirono, we gotta go check in with the Coons, y'all. Hundreds of Trump's lower court judges shouldn't be allowed to sit peaceably in response to a duly elected president nominating a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Can you frickin' believe it? On Monday's broadcast of MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show, Senate Judiciary Committee member Senator Chris Coons said that there should be a wide-open conversation on rebalancing the courts. Packing the courts, hey? Including the circuit and district courts, where there are hundreds of judges who shouldn't be allowed to sit peaceably without our re-examining the process, the results, and the consequences. Coons said, "We've got to have a wide-open conversation about how we're going to rebalance our courts. Yes, the 2 Supreme Court seats that have been stolen through these processes that are just wildly hypocritical have been used to jam through partisan nominees. But we've got to look at our federal courts as a whole, Rachel. Because we've seen hundreds of conservative judges put into circuit courts and district courts all over the country and for the last 4 years, in many cases, too young, too unqualified, and too far right to be allowed to sit peaceably without our re-examining the process, the results, and the consequences." What a lump of shit Chris Coons is. But he's from Delaware, a state in the union that has a long history of senators that are completely full of shit. I don't think I need to name any names here. So as we've found out here in the past few months, most of the shit that these leftists like to push is pure projection. So what he would want, if it was, let's just say Hillary Clinton right now, he'd want a young, unbiased instead of unqualified, and a far left individual to sit on the courts. And you know what? You can blame that on that guy right there. And the fact that he left over, 125 openings on different courts around the entire country prior to him leaving because they were so convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Where have I heard that narrative before? But how about we go from Delaware over to Massachusetts? Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts calling the judiciary originalism, a type of reading of the Constitution where you read it as it has been written and not as a living document, which, if you read it as a living document, you can make it seem like whatever the fuck you want it to be. It's like, let's just say you're reading the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. And the exact reading I pulled up right here. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, if you're an originalist, you would say, oh, okay, people have the right to keep and bear arms. It's a constitutional right. Otherwise, if you're kind of a postmodernist retard, you could say, oh, it's only in the cases where you guys are going to be practicing together in a gun club, like the military. Only the military should have all the guns. See how wonky that shit gets? Now, read it as it's written, fucker. But here's what's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard from somebody who's been elected. Racist, sexist, homophobic, and a fancy word for discrimination is patently irresponsible. Save for the patently irresponsible part, that's exactly what Ed Markey said about being an originalist. So by proxy, he's saying that all 5 of the other Republican appointees to the Supreme Court are indeed racist, sexist, homophobic, and a fancy word for discrimination. I bet you this lump of shit could think of another special fancy word for Clarence Thomas. And before we arrive at our final destination, let's swing over to the House. Over there in California, Nancy Pelosi suggests packing the Supreme Court and district courts because if you can't win by the rules, change the rules. House Speaker on court expansion will... Let's take a look and see. It's become one of the biggest hot button topics on the campaign trail, packing the Supreme Court, but now House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is taking it a step further, suggesting it will pack the district courts as well, because guess what? They just can't lose like children, just belly aching assholes. In 1876, there were 9 justices on the courts. Our population has grown enormously since then. What the fuck does that have to do with anything? That is just some doddering old woman, she is 80 after all, just making a link between two separate situations where none really exists. I know exactly what they're priming this situation for if they win. And on Sunday, with the release of 60 Minutes, Joe Biden finally offered something in regards to packing the courts. Once again, it's another one of these, hey Joe, can you give me a straight answer? Look, here's the deal. I won't do that. This is kind of what he did. So in the 60 Minutes interview with Norah O'Donnell, Biden gives an answer, sort of. He would appoint a bipartisan commission to propose reforms. There's a number of things that our constitutional scholars have debated, and I've looked to see what the recommendations that commission might make. There are a number of alternatives that goes well beyond court packing. The only thing I want to see is him packing his fucking bags and heading out of Washington. So that's probably the clearest answer we're going to get before Election Day, even though he said that we'd have some kind of a firm answer. But when you're 77 years old, I guess that's probably as firm as anything's ever going to get for him. Since we've heard from the big guy, the presidential nominee, that is, let's go to his running mate. Now, Kamala Harris made an absolute spectacle out of herself during the hearings, and I like my brain cells where they are, and I have a lot better things to do with my time than to go back over her half an hour long soliloquy that she performed to Amy Coney Barrett and wouldn't let her talk and was just as condescending as she normally is, and especially during the vice presidential debate. But she went off last night after the vote took place, and here's her spiteful rejoinder. Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris admonished Senate Republicans for confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court on Monday, vowing that Democrats won't forget a move they have described as a power grab. Today, Republicans denied the will of the American people, even though a president is elected for 4 years. But hey, if you're running against them, you can just cut it down to whatever length you'd like it to be by confirming a Supreme Court justice through an illegitimate process. Oh, I'm so glad you will never get a chance to determine which processes are legitimate and illegitimate. I can tell you what you've personally done that's illegitimate. Keep people in federal or state prisons longer than their prison sentence just to maximize on cheap labor, hold evidence that would keep an innocent man off a death row, prosecute single parents for not enforcing their kids go to school through truancy laws, and be some kind of music listening time traveler. But I'm sure all of that's copacetic, right? I've reached out to Willie Brown to see if he has any comments on the situation, but he was busy apparently. All in their effort to gut the Affordable Care Act and strip health care away from millions with pre-existing conditions. Let's not forget that President Trump has signed an executive order to protect against pre-existing conditions, and has also said that once he repeals stupid Obamacare, they have a comprehensive plan that is going to be put into place, which they've also mentioned several times throughout the past 4 years, that will also protect against people losing their coverage with pre-existing conditions, which is all of a sudden just the most important thing in the world, even though Amy Coney Barrett has said nothing about, wanting to get rid of anybody's rights. Even though I don't consider healthcare to be a human right, I think it is something that you are more than capable of getting for yourself, because being a Canadian, I know how shit socialized healthcare is, and you can pay for something good or get something shitty for free. Your choice. Harris said Monday, minutes after Barrett was officially confirmed to the court. We won't forget this. And there was a little oft overlooked clip from the vice presidential debates to bring that up again. When Mike Pence pressed Kamala Harris to answer the question of will Biden and Harris pack the courts if they do indeed win, Kamala Harris brought up the fact that Donald Trump hasn't nominated anybody of color, and that is their ultimate game. They will indeed pack the courts, and they will do it based on diversity. Just because Amy Coney Barrett's a woman isn't good enough for them. They would like to add probably a black justice, a Mexican justice, a trans justice, a crazy justice, They could really just actually accomplish all of that by nominating Kamala Harris herself. But that was the highlights of the Democratic meltdown that happened last night. And Godspeed, great health, and here's to a 40-year successful term in the Supreme Court, Miss Amy Coney Barrett. I thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo, and I want you guys to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.